Hi, everyone, and welcome to another podcast episode about life abroad. My name is Stefan Stosic, and in today's podcast episode, I have one Canadian with me who has been already living in Germany, in Berlin, for some years, and he is a friend of mine, and therefore I invited him to speak about his own experience and own inner triggers why he decided to move to Germany. Therefore, I wish hello to Graeme. Hi, Graeme, and welcome to my podcast.
Hi, Stefan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being my guest on podcast. So at the beginning, I just said that you already live here in Germany, in Berlin, for a couple of years. So I have questions that I'm myself interested to know what were your triggers and desires actually to move from Canada to Berlin. But before we dip into those questions, I would firstly like to ask you to introduce yourself to our audience so they get to know better who you are, what you're doing at the moment.
Sure. I'm Graeme. I've been living in Germany for just about, I moved to Germany about 4 years ago and had some time living back in Canada there. So it's about 3.5 years, but in total, I'm from the Toronto area of Canada. It's sort of on the southern border with the United States near the Great Lakes. So grew up there in a small suburb city and spent time in university in other countries. So I think the experience I had was doing an exchange semester in the UK at other points. But I think in total, my experience was as someone who grew up in Canada and knew very on that there were other opportunities that I wanted to pursue outside of the country. I think from early on always wanted to pursue that. So I think maybe one element of that is like my family is English. So I think from an early age, maybe it starts with my name even. So my name is Graeme. It's like got a Celtic origin to it, originally Scottish, but I'm the only one in my family who has a name like this. Like my other brothers have sort of Christian names. And so I think I've always felt that there was something about myself that was outside of Canada.
Okay.
Sure, I think most Canadians come from other places, have their own backstory, their own like identities that they're working with. But I think that was my sort of way of seeing that and seeing myself in other places.
Okay, so then it's like from early age, then you knew or you kind of sense that there are more things to experience or to
Yeah.
see outside of Canada. And actually, it's really nice and a bit weird to hearing you speaking in English because whenever we meet up, it's always
Too.
like even when we met,
Yeah.
we started speaking in German, and this is actually how we met on one of the events in Berlin. So hearing you talking in English, it's kind of weird for
Yeah.
me, but at the
Same for
same
me
time,
in a little
nice.
way.
Yes. Can you just recall, or just to get a better picture, you were feeling this desire inside you, within you, that you would like to experience or see more than Canada and your hometown or own country.
Yeah.
But how was the first step for you to make? Because you mentioned also you had a semester abroad in the UK, right? So then how from that version of Graeme you came to the point that you're moving to Germany? How old were you and
Yeah.
how the decision making process was for you?
I think when you look at it that perspective, it's a long process for sure. I think it starts with my studies. Like for context, I did study what was essentially a combination of history and languages. So from an early age, I think I was one of these kids in high school who was just quite nerdy, interested in history, and at that time wanted to pursue that as my life. Like was very passionate about it. Always going into the library, watching history documentaries, and so one of the people we're pursuing like wanted to go on and study engineering or the sciences. I sort of stuck to what I was passionate about and tried to select courses in high school that would prepare me for applying for university. And so at the time, in Canada, everyone has to study French, and so I had my experiences with that, and then with studying foreign languages. And then I think when I was maybe 17 or 18, I started playing around with Duolingo, and because I didn't want to learn French much more, and Spanish wasn't very much of an idea for me, I started playing around with German, and so I think that's the seed that brought me to Germany, that I wanted to continue studying the language, and then from that, I knew when I was applying for university that I one, wanted to study the language a bit more professionally. I was just mostly watching YouTube videos from this crazy content creator called Easy German back in the day, and then knew that I wanted to apply for universities which had programs specializing in German and mostly European history. So, of course, in Canada, there's a lot of like North American history that you can study, but I was dead set on understanding Europe, understanding European politics and culture, and was just, again, a bit of a nerd, like the Middle Ages, studying ancient Rome, and just wanted to do that on that path. So eventually went into university studying that. So in Canada, you can choose degrees that are basically course-based, at least at the bachelor's level, where you can choose from, you can structure it so that you have a major and a minor, at least in the humanities. And so I chose my major as history and my minor as the German language. It was German studies. In the courses, we actually didn't spend too much time speaking in German, more like watch at the earlier levels of the language and of the course, it was mostly watching movies and reading, I think, works of German literature just in English. So it wasn't too structured, but I think it was just still really fun. And so found opportunities to do that. And I think going on throughout my degree, wanted to find another way that I could continue doing this. I saw myself going on this academic path at the time, so knew that I wanted to study up into a master's, maybe to a PhD. That was the sort of thing that I had in my mind. And so continued with the German because at the time I understood that if you apply to grad school, it's best to have a secondary language that you can sort of support, you can use in your research. And so I kept specializing myself in sort of European history, specifically medieval history, and the German was always there, so I tried to focus on German history whatever way I could.
Okay, so kind of sympathy towards the language is actually something that brought you actually being and living nowadays in Germany and in Berlin. And it's very interesting to hear, especially for one Canadian there, where maybe French would be closer to you, or I don't know, like some language that, but like speaking about like Canadian being interested in the German language, it's not so common.
No.
Now when I think of Canada coming and moving to Europe and to Germany, so basically you graduated, and then how was this path? Okay, so you knew that you would like to pursue actually further development of your German speaking skills or in general about the language. But let's say now what I have on my mind is how one Canadian teenager or young person after finishing his studies actually decided to move all over to Europe being alone. Wasn't it scary, or how did you overcome actually those mental barricades?
Yeah, I think it certainly was scary. To put myself back in my shoes, when I was finishing university, I was on this path of pursuing something academic. I think I went into my master's with this state of mind. I wanted to see how it would be pursuing a PhD. I think I made the wrong choice of applying, sort of doing my master's straight after my bachelor's. So I think some people take a gap year, cool off, maybe go travel. But then I went straight into it and had an 8-month master's program, which was a little too intense for me. Then saw that I think most of the people doing my field of study were also, or who were doing my field of study and wanted to do that for their PhD and ultimately to get onto a tenure track position and really make that their lives were, not to say that I wasn't in this field myself, but were very passionate. And I think it's a position where, in a way of life that you do have to be wholly dedicated to making that your life, because unfortunately, there's not a lot of jobs in this field, and it's not one that's paid well enough and has the job security that I think a lot of people should pursue or sort of choose to pursue. So I saw that, understood that I wanted to have, I think, more balance in my life to ensure that I wasn't going to be stuck pursuing something indefinitely for the rest of my life without having that flexibility. So I sort of closed the book on an academic career and then sort of took a moment to reflect on what might be more interesting. And I think because I saw myself as having studied both German and history, I sort of finished the part that was related to history and thought, well, what can I do with this German that I've been studying? So I had a friend at the time, a German friend who lives here locally in Berlin, who came to Canada on a youth mobility visa. We'd met, hung out, and so he told me about these experiences that he had traveling around Canada, and also ultimately how he came here. So the youth mobility program is a program that's established between, I think, a number of Western countries, like between Canada and Germany, the US and Germany. I don't know how many other European countries, but Japan is also involved as well. And so if you're between the ages of 18 and 35, you can go to these countries without a visa, having applied and gotten your permissions, but can essentially work and travel for a period of 1 to 2 years, depending on your home country, in the country that you choose. So I set that as my plan. After finishing university, sort of took the summer to prepare for that. Knew that I would be likely going to Germany in the next year. So
How old were you at the time?
I would have been 23. So by the time I finished my studies, and now interestingly, this was 2019. So knowing, well, basically I applied with the youth mobility visa. It's something that you can, in theory, do yourself. You can do your own relocation. But my friend had also come to Canada with the assistance of an agency. And so I found sort of the parallel agency located in Germany. And so paid for their services, had them assist me with my relocation, and that was the process for that. So I arrived in Germany in January of 2020, had them at this agency assist me with, I think, all of the standards things that if you're a foreigner coming to another country that are at least that functions differently, when it functions in a different language, then they can be quite daunting. So they helped me with relocation, finding an apartment, the immigration process, ensuring that you had the right documents. That here in Germany as well, you need to have the Anmeldung. Yeah. So the whole idea of what exactly is required when you arrive in a country, having yourself registered, they got that sorted and basically established a checklist that I had to work off of, and that helped me to do that.
Okay, and just to understand better, so basically it means that both parts, like history and then German, like being interested in both parts. So basically when you drop one, compare like thinking about your future and what kind of life you want to have, basically you kind of rely on the second half that was like something that was interesting you, like German language. And then you connected with the experience and over coffee with your friends. So basically you decided on this actually that you could be open to new possibilities and opportunities, and you decided to move. That's really brave. And not having like, which is like, I would say for beginning of 20s, it's like, it's something that we can say that it's normal or it's like common, that we are very open and we do not have the whole plan figured out. Like we just see what makes us excited, and then we just go for it.
Exactly.
And basically when you move on this visa, so it means that you had 6 months of work and travel, right?
A total of a year.
To a year.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so basically it means that you didn't have any source of income when you came to Germany, and then you had this agency helping you out. Because if it was January 2020, and this is the period when I defended my master thesis, and then I needed to think, it was the first month actually for me thinking or making a transition between the university life to young professional life. And then it was like beginning of hard times, I would say, especially with the pandemic coming or already the next month. So how this transition period was for you, because from Canada moving to Germany, okay, you are excited about the language and all the things that may be possible for you or that you're going to be discovering, but at the same time you needed maybe to figure it out how you are going to make your income, or what job you would like to get, or how you will make friends. So how was this, like, let's say, mental background for you happening?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think what you pointed out earlier in your question has also made me realize that I think the person that I was at 23 was, someone who was very passionate and also I think a little stubborn. Like the idea that to take something that you this very adventurous path wanting to go to another country and just studying the language and there. So I think looking back, as someone who's now more of a planner and realizes the risks associated with moving to another country, I was quite bold doing that. And I think certainly as I look back, there were a lot of maybe comments from my parents trying to understand what exactly I had planned when I was going to go to another country, if I had done enough to prepare for myself, and I did in the end. But I think it's something that you don't realize in the moment. Like you do just want to have this sort of backpacker mentality. Like you've got everything with you, you're ready to get on the flight and go, but all the problems that will await you are going to await you on foreign shores. So it's just something for a later Graeme that you have to deal with. But how I dealt with that when I arrived, I mean, it was definitely difficult. Well, at least for the first 2 months. I mean, it's always a question of when the pandemic actually kicked off. Like I arrived January 15th, so had maybe a month and a half where I was getting to know my housemates, getting to know other people in the city, and exploring Berlin as best as I could, going to museums, learning the language, just experiencing that. And then quickly the alarm bells and the news started going that there's a global pandemic going on and the world was going to change. So in the midst that I was applying for jobs, I was applying, but then needed to find something quickly. And I think what you were also referring to is how exactly I made this transition. And so I think in the moment, I set myself, or I looked realistically at what I had accomplished before in my sort of academic career that I had done. So aside from being involved in student societies such as the history society, where you just sort of, where I was involved as I think I was maybe the vice president or a treasurer for the society, just sort of organizing various events such as pub nights and these sorts of things, like sort of low-key events. I'd also spent time working in museums, working as a student researcher, and so had an idea of working with people, had these sort of soft skills that you also develop within history degrees, and these sort of critical thinking skills that are sort of stand out, I think, more in relation to other degrees, but had that and needed to figure out how I could turn that into a job, because money was an issue. And so one of the suggestions from this agency was Berlin's software industry. Nothing that I'd had too much contact with in the past, but knew that it could be an option. So set myself for the position of sales. It was something that was going to be quite entry level, but something where I could take my interest in working with people, understanding their problems, and finding ways to essentially translate that for a business. So again, it was a position that I think I spent a lot of time like researching, going on HubSpot Academy, trying to understand exactly what this position is, because I had no work experience in business or had really no contact points with anything like that before. And so as the history student that I was just interested in learning more and getting into it. And so successfully applied, got a job, and started working in April, thankfully enough. So sort of got right into it, and then had a nice experience working in a startup.
Okay, so basically, like with the hit of the pandemic, you also got your first job and you started working.
Yeah.
So within 3 months after, I would say like within 3 months, you already had your life settled down with the job, and then your next step and what you're going to be working on. And because it's also 2020 and this year was really challenging. I mean, I was already back that time, like already 2 years abroad. And then for me it was challenging adapting, and it was like transition period, and then I went home and so on. So when I think of that, let's say from parents' perspective, okay, my kid just flew to Germany, to Europe, to another part of the world. It's the beginning of the pandemic, and then the whole world started being in panic. No one knew what was happening, and you're in Germany and they're in Canada. And back that time, I was in Spain. Spain was the first or the second hotspot in Europe, and then I flew to Serbia. But then it's like 3-hour flight. But when I think of Canada and Germany, how is this distance like in your brain? How do you see it, and how it was back at that time that you were peaceful with start of the pandemic, but also it was a new chapter of my life.
Yeah.
And then I got my job, and then I'm in the country where I would like to improve the local language. I know that this is my next step. I'm excited about that. But then you have external factors versus parents' pressure maybe, or their worries, or their questions or calls. How did you overcome this period not moving back, for example?
Yeah. No, I think in a lot of ways there was and always is a lot of trust between me and my parents. I think a lot of common understanding that I moved to Germany with the goal that it was going to be for 1 year. I did only, after successfully applying for it, I still had that as the sort of deadline that I would move back to Canada to January of 2021. So that was sort of on the horizon, and I knew that when I got the job, especially, that things were sort of ironed out. So I had the money, was able to survive, but there was that whole question, unparalleled circumstances or something that isn't so easy for parents to deal with when their children are away. So a lot of trust. But I think for me as well.
And you were never considering actually going like on giving up that visa or anything, and then just decide, okay, maybe I try next year because I can do that, so let's just go back to Canada. So you never considering going back at that moment?
No, I got the job and was satisfied with that. So I was determined to stay for the year.
Now looking back, I would just like to point out the distance between Canada and Germany, because now it's more than 3 years you are here in Germany. So it was not tied only to January 2021 that you will go back. So then after that, I know like from our meetups and hanging around that you also got another job and so on. So basically your life, it's now for more than 3 years here in Berlin.
Exactly.
So when you look at someone that comes from Canada and grew up there and finished education there and his family is there, and you live in Germany, in Berlin, like how do you cope with the distance, or are you sometimes homesick, for example? How do you cope with the geographical distance, I would say?
Yeah, I think interestingly, it's something that I don't think of in too much of a geographical sense.
Okay.
I mean, I've always established good communication with my family. Like we always talk and text on a daily basis. The time difference is, I guess, one obstacle. So it's 6 hours from here to the Toronto area, and otherwise the flights, if we would take it, I mean, I always tend to take longer flights just out of cost efficiency, but would take a day. I don't see it in that way, and I think the rhythm that I've set into now is just going back once a year for Christmas. It's a time when there's the most to celebrate. My family has like my mother has a birthday and my brother does as well around the Christmas time. So it's something that it's easier to plan for, but I think especially it is something that I do miss them, and I absolutely wish that there were easier ways to have them closer. And I think I increasingly find that there's an element of family life that is missing, and so I try to do my best to have close friendships, to build the network here that can keep me supported in the ways that I think maybe lacks when you don't have family. But I think that's that. It's one of the trials of being an expat in a foreign country, and I think it's something that, I mean, if you're from even further countries like Australia or Latin America, I think the time difference is greater, but it's still something that's quite relative. So it's all about how close people are.
Because your initial plan was to stay for a year, right? And then go back. So could you recall when was the moment that you consciously or unconsciously decided, okay, I might stay longer?
Well, the thing is, I did go back in January 2020.
Okay.
So, or in 2021.
Okay.
So the visa did expire. At the time, Germany and Canada stopped issuing the visas for youth mobility. Like they stopped issuing youth mobility visas in period because there were travel bans, and so you didn't want to encourage, or just out of reality, you couldn't have people traveling between countries, and so that was one way of encouraging that, and so they stopped that. And so I did go back to Canada for the 6 months. So after having worked in this company for 2020, the other reason is that I met someone who I wanted to have a future with here back in Berlin. and used that as a bridge, and made sure that I could find time to spend with them, and ultimately also wanted to come back to Berlin for the reasons that I'd established here. So I'd established friends, understood that this was going to be a place where I was going to have a professional career, and so used all of these together as motivation to come back. So with that, I stayed in Canada for the 6 months just because I needed to spend time finding a new job, was able to do that remotely, and also just as a practicality needed to sort of wait until the travel ban had lessened, when the sort of world came back to normal relatively as it did in 2020. So there was a bit of a waiting game but while I was back home in Canada, but especially, I mean, it was a great time to see my family, and certainly appreciated being back there with them.
Looking back now, what's the biggest benefit or what's the biggest experience that shaped you into the person you are today? What are the most grateful for out of this experience for the past 3+ years?
Another great question. I think personal development is something I always count on.
What's personal development in this sense for you?
I think it's the opportunity to be independent in your own space, to find ways to develop in, I think, just independently. I think as I find going back home, there are things that, although I'm very close with my family, like you just naturally have ways that maybe you fall into old rhythms. I find that when I go back to home, so there are ways that you were when you were a younger person that maybe you don't see yourself as so closely to when you're older and you have newer habits, newer ways of living, and I think also just newer mentalities. It's being able to approach those and to be challenged in the ways that you can develop yourself and to rise to those challenges.
So when you say that it's self-development for you, that you discover the most, or being independent, like, do you also think that it's also finding out more who you are and what suits you better in your life, or who you would like to be just by staying abroad, and what fits you and what not to your personality maybe?
Yeah, very much so. I think it's a question of whether that is a process happening exclusively because I live abroad, like live in another country, or if that's also something that would generally happen when someone lives away from home. Like, I think that would happen potentially if I lived in another part of Canada, but I think the element of living abroad certainly lets you be challenged in the way that living in a foreign country, being exposed to other ways of living, cultures, and I think abilities to travel, the ways that lets you experience other ways of living.
I would say that also that personal development and discovering who you are also doesn't come always an easy way.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes also with the challenges. What would you say that were the biggest challenges that you faced on that path that maybe you didn't like that much?
Yeah, I think I would say it certainly happened more in my personal area, or like in my own personal life. I think career is one thing, but I think the element of living alone and having to develop maybe just understanding what it means to live alone for the first time. I got into my own apartment in the second year that I was moved here. So I think having the challenge of fitting out an apartment for yourself and knowing how to structure your life and finding the ways to have that come into what you want for your life is one thing that I saw.
When I think now of Canada as a very developed country and one of the biggest economies in the world, and Germany is also one of the leading countries within European Union, why do Canadians choose to go or to come to Germany, like to cross the ocean? And then what would you say from your perspective?
Yeah, I think everyone certainly has their own motivations.
Yes.
What I would say is my motivation is just is to have this, I could call it like the adventure of living abroad. The idea that you can leave your home country and explore what the world has to offer. I think Berlin's a great place because it's simultaneously German but also incredibly international. So you do get access to other cultures that, sure, I think certainly you would have in Canada because we are such a multicultural nation. But I think there's a lot that Berlin and its access to other European, and its access to other parts of Europe that it has to offer. And so I do understand what you mean, like why exactly is a Canadian from a developed country leaving his homeland. And so it is for that. I think just maybe because of my personal motivations, I'm passionate about history and culture and want to understand, or maybe go to the source of European history, experience that, and have that as an element of my work-life balance, like to know that there is more of an appreciation for culture here that I think I found was somewhat lacking in Canada, or at least where I'm from. And so that's the reason. The other is, of course, that at least in Germany, you get a lot of holiday days. With most positions, you get around, say, 26, 28. And so this is a number that every time I tell my parents or my family members, I get, yeah, they roll their eyes because it's much more than you get at home. So something that I'm very grateful for, because it allows you to travel more. I think it's a degree of flexibility in your life that is just easily taken.
For your 3.5 years living here, what are benefits that you could see from the German system, or something you didn't expect, or maybe you expected, but something that positively surprised you about the country or the system that you live in now?
I think it is easier than I imagined to get visas. I mean, I guess I don't have too much experience with applying and working in other countries, so there's that. I think maybe my mind always goes to the negative, unfortunately, and I think as someone who is on a normal working visa, the process of having to change that between employers is something that is a bit of a wrinkle every time I have to work again. And so that's one element of it. The other, that Germany is maybe too paper reliant. There's a lot of documentation that has to be sent manually between departments, but I think that's maybe a small complaint.
Now, when you think of you being here with the life experience you have living abroad and being here, if you look back, if I ask you what would you do differently with the knowledge you have right now, what would you say?
I think it's always a tempting question. I like looking back on my past and like my path to this point, that I am the result of the decisions that I took. And so I think, at least when I had a plan to move to Germany and to do everything as I did, it was quite purposeful. So I don't think there's that much I would change in that sense. Certainly if I had the skill set and the attitudes towards things that I had now, I would probably be more outgoing in university to be more adventurous. I think naturally everyone has areas that they don't think of exploring or taking an interest in when they're younger, but I think this is all sort of hindsight. They're just elements of life that you come to explore and come to enjoy that maybe you don't see the value in earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, like I think in particular I was never too outgoing. I think since coming to Berlin I've enjoyed nightlife and understanding what that can bring.
And now, just for the end, let's say that behind this camera is younger version of yourself. What would you advise to him with the experience you have right now?
Yeah, I think I would advise him to stick to the plan. I think if I could give advice to me, who was sitting in his shared apartment in Berlin and in those like hectic months of January 2020 and like of all those months, is just to stick with it. Like there's a lot of questions to understand how things are going to pan out, but I think ultimately is to stick to the plan, understand your ambitions, and I think it's maybe a cliche, but like don't sweat the small stuff. Things are going to come and go, but everything that you see happening in your life can ultimately be used as a learning experience. So I think that's the best way to approach it, and certainly is what I take as like my life philosophy, is find ways to extract the good out of the bad.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
I think it's like really nice advice for the end, and also for young people who watch to this podcast and they have or they feel desire that they would like to live abroad and move to another country and have this kind of experience in their own way. Starts a thank you very much for being
Thank you.
my guest on the podcast and sharing your experience.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my experiences.
Thank you very much, and you all who watched this podcast episode. And if you're someone who wants to live abroad or find their path of how they could start their studies abroad or how you could make it abroad, please check out the links below this video.